The silence that fell over Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, was so thick it seemed almost physical. It pressed down on every person inside, making the air feel heavier, as if every sound had stopped, frozen in time. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Cutlery paused mid-air, and dozens of eyes were fixed on a small space between two tables. In that space stood 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery, his legs trembling inside metal braces that supported his every movement. His body shook slightly, and his hands reached out hesitantly toward Diana Johnson, the restaurant's only white waitress. The live piano had just started playing, a soft, gentle melody that seemed to wrap itself around the room like a warm blanket. Without any warning, Lucas did something unexpected. He asked Diana to dance. The manager, Thornton, was quick to break the silence. His voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a whip. "Sir, control your son. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Richard Montgomery, owner of Montgomery Investments and one of the richest men in the country, swallowed hard. It was the first time he had taken Lucas out to dinner in public since the accident. 2 years ago, the accident that had partially paralyzed his son's legs. It was a mistake he was determined never to repeat. "Lucas, sit down," Richard said, his voice low but firm. Diana remained still. Her eyes shifted between the manager, the billionaire, and the boy whose small hand still hovered in the air, waiting. In her 5 years working at Kingsley's, Diana had learned one important thing: how to become invisible, especially to customers like Richard Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving. My shift is over," she said calmly, as she removed her apron and placed it on the tray. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled gently at Lucas and took his hand. "I can't dance in an apron." Richard stood up quickly, his face tight with disbelief. "What do you think you're doing?" Diana held his gaze without flinching. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before anyone could stop them, Lucas took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully across the polished floor, the metal of his braces scraping loudly as he moved. But Diana didn't rush to guide him or hurry him along. She simply adjusted her own pace to match his slow, careful steps. "She's getting fired tomorrow," whispered a woman at the next table. Richard stood frozen, caught between shock and something he didn't quite understand. Suddenly a memory hit him. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Lucas in their living room years ago. "It's not about perfection," Elizabeth had said. "It's about connection." As Diana followed Lucas's clumsy steps, something shifted in the boy's eyes. Fear began to fade, replaced by intense concentration. Shame gave way to shy pride. For the first time since the accident, Lucas wasn't being guided or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager's voice broke through Richard's thoughts. "I can assure you this will never happen again. She will be disciplined." Richard didn't reply. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his word, one word that could destroy a career. But all he could hear was Lucas's smile echoing in his mind. After 3 dance steps, Diana gently led Lucas back to his chair. "Thank you for asking me out," she said softly, as if speaking to an adult. "It was an honor." As she turned to leave, Richard called after her, his voice unsteady and unfamiliar, even to himself. "What's your full name?" "Diana Johnson, sir," she answered. Richard nodded slowly, repeating her name as if committing it to memory. Then, from inside his jacket, he pulled out a card and handed it to her. "My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Diana accepted the card, her hand trembling just slightly. "Dad," Lucas called softly, as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question hung in the air like a quiet accusation. Richard looked at his son, and for the first time in a long while, saw not a fragile child in need of constant care, but a complete human being with hopes and needs he had systematically ignored for 2 years. Dinner continued in uncomfortable silence. No one noticed the glance Diana threw before leaving, not one of fear or defeat, but of calm determination. It was a look that clashed with the storm brewing in Richard Montgomery's eyes. The next morning, Diana Johnson stood in the sparkling lobby of Montgomery Tower, feeling out of place. The glass and marble walls reflected the bright Manhattan sunlight, but they also magnified her nerves. She clutched her worn purse tightly. Her navy blue skirt and white blouse, bought on sale, felt small and fragile against the backdrop of power suits and designer clothes that passed by her. She reminded herself this was no ordinary meeting. Diana Johnson, to see Mr. Montgomery, she said calmly to the receptionist, who gave her a cool, clinical look before making a call. 18th floor. Miss Winters will see you now, the receptionist said as Diana stepped into the elevator. She took a deep breath. This wasn't fear. It was quiet determination, the kind that comes from having faced worse challenges before. Miss Winters was waiting in a sleek, mirrored hallway. She was a woman. In her 40s, with sharp eyes and impeccable posture. Mr. Montgomery is on a conference call. Please follow me, Winters said. Walking through the executive offices, Diana noticed the curious stares of employees. A white woman escorted through these halls was rare enough to cause speculation. Had you fired, didn't he? Winters asked suddenly, as they sat alone in a waiting room. It happens, Winters said with a shrug. Powerful clients call, and people like you lose their jobs. People like me. Diana smiled, not amused. And where exactly would that be? Before Winters could answer, her phone rang. He'll see you now. Richard Montgomery's office took up half the floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a breathtaking view of Manhattan, making the city seem like a distant playground. The man stood, gazing out his back to Diana as if the city belonged to him. Mr. Montgomery, Diana said formally. Richard turned slowly, his face a mask of control. Miss Johnson, thank you for coming, he said, motioning to a chair. The silence that followed was thick and deliberate. Diana recognized it immediately. A tactic designed to unsettle nervous people, to make them talk too much or reveal things they shouldn't. Do you have a background? Richard finally asked. Education, Diana replied. College, bachelor's degree in child development from New York University, a complete master's degree in special education. Something flashed across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps? And you work as a waitress? He asked. I work 3 jobs, actually, Diana answered. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can get students. Richard picked up a folder from the table and opened it. I did some research. On you, Miss Johnson? I wanted to understand who the woman who danced with my son was. He revealed printed photos of a community center, Freedom Steps. You founded that? Diana sat up straighter. Co-founded it with my sister Zoe, she said. It's a dance program for children with physical disabilities. Richard flipped through documents. It's about to close due to lack of funding. Diana showed no surprise. Of course you would find that out so quickly. I didn't come to ask for money, Mr. Montgomery, Diana said. Then why did you come? Because you invited me. Richard laughed, but there was no joy in it. Fair enough, he said, standing again, restless. I want you to work for me. Diana blinked, taken aback. As a waitress in your house? Richard's face hardened. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas. The words seemed difficult for him to say. Diana noticed his eyes drift to a photo on the table, a smiling woman holding a baby. I have the best specialists in the country, Richard continued. Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday, he paused, struggling with the words. It was just a dance. It was the first time I've seen him smile since the accident. The admission hit hard. I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can follow, not lead. Diana studied him. Beneath the mask of power and control, she saw what others missed. A desperate, lost father. I can pay you 5 times what you're making now. Diana stood up. No. Richard looked shocked, as if hearing that word was foreign to him. I don't work for people who see only my color or my social class before they see my competence, she said calmly. And I definitely don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems. Richard's face flushed. You're turning down an offer that would solve your financial problems. Out of pride? Out of dignity? Diana corrected. "Damned. Because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care." She walked to the door but paused. "Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to lead his own life. But I know my son, but I know people like him. People whose physical limits are nothing compared to the invisible cages built around them." She placed a card on the table. "Freedom Steps. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. First class is free if you'd like to bring Lucas." As Diana left, Winters whispered behind the door, "You just turned down an offer from Richard Montgomery. Are you crazy?" Diana smiled. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy than property." A few days later, Diana was at the reception desk of the Freedom Steps Community Center. The walls were decorated with colorful handmade posters that read, "Your rhythm, your rules. And every move counts." It was a small, worn warehouse, nothing fancy, but full of heart. Her sister Zoe, co-founder of the program, rushed up to her, excitement written all over her face. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she whispered. Adjusting her hijab nervously, "You won't believe who's inside." Through the window, Diana saw the sleek black car. Lucas was in the back seat, looking out anxiously, his leg braces clear in the sunlight. Richard was behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was fighting an inner battle. "He's not coming in," Zoe said quietly. "Men like him don't come to places like this." Diana smiled softly, remembering Lucas's gaze during those brief moments of dancing. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son. The car door opened. Lucas stepped out slowly, adjusting his gadgets. To everyone's surprise, Richard got out too. The billionaire looked out of place in casual pants and a sweater, an obvious attempt to dress down, but still radiating privilege. "I told you he'd come," Diana murmured, more to herself than Zoe. "What did you do?" Zoe asked, eyes wide. Diana didn't answer. Her eyes sparkled with a secret even her sister didn't fully know. Hidden under her bed in a tiny Bronx apartment was a notebook filled with years of observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. A plan had begun with a simple acceptance of an invitation to dance. What Richard Montgomery didn't know, what he couldn't imagine in his world of glass towers and endless bank accounts, was that Diana Johnson wasn't just a waitress who had agreed to dance with his son. She was a woman with a mission, and his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge. The simple truth was that some of the greatest lessons in life couldn't be bought. They had to be lived. Inside Freedom Steps, children with various mobility devices moved freely to a light beat. Now, the center was alive with energy and movement, not therapy or drills, but free expression. Richard watched from the doorway, discomfort etched across his face. "It looks chaotic," he said quietly. "There is structure," Diana replied. "It's just not the kind you recognize." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to join in?" Lucas nodded eagerly but glanced at his father hesitantly. "Go on," Richard said tensely. "I'll be right here." As Diana guided Lucas into the group, Zoe approached Richard with a chair. "The first day is always the hardest," she said gently. "For the parents, not the kids." "This isn't therapy," Richard argued. "I hired the best specialists at house." "That had been working for Lucas?" Zoe asked softly. Just then, the studio door opened. An older woman entered, leaning on an ornate cane. Her gray hair was braided elegantly, and she carried a quiet authority. Dr. Ella Mercer, a neuroscientist specializing in brain plasticity, retired from Harvard, greeted several children before noticing Richard. "Mr. Montgomery," she said directly, "you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the last 2 years. "I didn't expect to see you here," Richard said stiffly. "I oversee the research program," Dr. Mercer explained. "We're studying how non-directive approaches to movement affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges." Richard frowned. "I thought this was just a community dance class," Anna returned, watching Lucas explore new movements with another child. "Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on movement autonomy," she explained. "We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles." "Why do you work as a waitress if you lead a research program?" Because we don't have adequate funding yet, Diana said. And because people like you rejected us 3 times. The penny dropped. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals, Richard concluded. Cowther, Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana had an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave college to care for her sister, but her theoretical work was groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard said. From the moment you walked in, Diana confirmed. And when Lucas got up to dance, I recognized the opportunity to show, not tell. Was it staged, the dance? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to get up. I chose to follow. Suddenly, a group of reporters entered the studio. Richard tensed. Part 2 of the plan? Diana smiled slightly. Zoe showed Richard a newly published article. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our first results today, Dr. Mercer explained. We invited the press. You used my son for a public relations stunt? Richard said coldly. Diana led him to a side room where photos of dozens of children lined the walls. Each photo had handwritten progress notes. On the last wall was an empty frame. What's that? Richard asked. Our future, Diana said. The full rehabilitation center we could build if we had the resources. 500 children a year instead of 50? You orchestrated all this? Richard muttered. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I saw an opportunity and took it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find a way. Zoe interrupted. It's Lucas. They rushed back. Lucas was at the center of the room, surrounded by other children. Someone had turned off the music. Everyone watched in silence. The boy had removed one of his braces and was trying to balance on just one support. Richard began to move forward. Wait, Diana whispered. Watch. Lucas took a deep breath. Focused into everyone's amazement, especially his father's, he took a complete step without full support. It was small, shaky, but entirely his. The children cheered. Camera flashes went off. Richard's usually unreadable face was now exposed, tears glistening in his eyes. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said softly. It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps on your own. Richard watched his son not as a problem to be managed, but as a complete person discovering his strength. This could have been done without manipulating me, he finally said. It could have, Diana replied, if you'd answered our calls or read our proposals 3 times. Reporters noticed Richard's shift. Murmurs spread as Lucas, unaware of the tension, practiced his new step with pure concentration. Richard Montgomery was cornered. Before him lay 2 choices: withdraw in anger and confirm his cold reputation, or embrace the moment his son created between power and freedom. Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory. His money and influence no longer defined the next step. His gaze shifted between his smiling son and waiting reporters. Humility was not in his vocabulary, but seeing Lucas's transformation, something inside him began to break. The orchestra of power he was used to suddenly played a new tune. He had to decide. Would he keep conducting or learn to follow? Richard Montgomery faced the reporters, waiting for his response. His son had just taken a step on his own in front of the cameras, and Diana Johnson had guided him to that moment with skill and care. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter asked, can you comment on your presence at Freedom Steps today? Is it true your foundation rejected funding this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, who was still practicing his new step, oblivious to the tension in the room. Then to everyone's surprise, especially Diana's, he smiled. You know what's hardest for someone in my position? Richard said, addressing the reporter but loud enough. For all to hear, admitting when we're wrong. The stunned silence filled the room. The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, continued, and to build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Miss Johnson. Camera flashes exploded. Zoe let out a cry of surprise. On one condition, Richard added, watching Diana tense, that Ms. Johnson retains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. 3 months later, Bulldozers were clearing the ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, but it was the most innovative. Every space was designed with direct input from children and their families. Diana supervised the construction frequently, but never alone. Lucas showed up regularly, sometimes bringing other children with him. To the staff's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also showed up quietly, observing the progress without interfering. "I never thought you'd actually show up at board meetings," Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed plans. "I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes. In front of him was a scientific article marked with post-it notes. "But here we are." Diana looked at him curiously. "Is this part of your public penance? Or do you really care?" "Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week," Diana said. "His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Richard looked surprised. "And you fired her?" Diana smiled. "'Cause you told me she was wrong." "She was," Diana said. Lucas was progressing faster than any traditional medical prediction. "Why did you never accept my apology?" Richard asked suddenly. "Because you never apologized," Diana said firmly. "You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology. It's compensation." Richard nodded slowly. "Fair enough." At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been greater. The huge adaptive space was filled with children using various mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, but flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Diana said, approaching quietly. "No," Richard agreed. "But he still needs me to be around. That's a crucial difference." Richard turned to face her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For teaching me to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Richard looked at Lucas, now helping a younger girl find her balance. He was proud not just of what Lucas had overcome, but what he had created for others. "And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey?" Richard Montgomery, once known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. "True leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way." A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 new cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methods began being implemented in hospitals nationwide. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, was enrolled in regular school. He became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to find their own pace. Richard learned the hardest and most valuable lesson: true power doesn't lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when to step back and let others lead. In a world where the powerful rarely change and the powerless often stay in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that true change happens when we cross invisible boundaries, when a billionaire learns from a waitress, and a father follows in his son's footsteps.